I never should have picked up that hitchhiker, but if I hadn't, I'd probably be dead today. That's what I've thought every single time somebody's asked me why my life changed that night out on the highway. But in the moment, driving alone through the dark, I had absolutely no idea I was about to pick up the strangest, most important passenger of my entire life, a man I would later swear, with everything in me, was Jesus himself. If something in this is already sitting heavy in your chest, hit the like button before I go further. It helps this find the people who need to hear it tonight. Before you go anywhere, check the first pinned comment under this video. My name is Karim Osman. It was 11:40 at night, and I'd been behind the wheel of my red rig for 14 straight hours, hauling a load I needed to drop in El Paso before sunrise. The interstate cutting through the Arizona desert was completely empty. No lights, no towns, not even the distant glow of another vehicle anywhere. Just the hum of the engine, the tires rolling over cracked asphalt, and dark mountains cutting a jagged line against a sky with no moon in it at all. I was 56 years old, and I'd spent better than 3 decades hauling freight across the Southwest. I knew that stretch of road like the back of my own hand, every curve, every pothole, every abandoned gas station along the way. I knew for a fact there was nothing out there in that part of the desert. No ranches nearby, no towns, no reason on earth for a human being to be out walking at that hour. That's why, when my headlights caught a figure standing at the edge of the road, I hit the brakes on pure instinct, my heart already pounding. A tall, thin man, standing completely alone in the middle of nowhere, one arm out, thumb up, asking for a ride. I slowed down, but I didn't stop right away. My first thought was suspicion. Out in that part of the country, in the years I'd been driving, stopping for a stranger in the dead of night could mean a robbery, a kidnapping, something worse. I'd heard stories from other drivers about traps set up exactly that way. Every instinct in me said to hit the gas and keep driving. But something about the whole scene didn't add up to danger. The man wasn't dressed like trouble, and he didn't carry himself like a threat either. He wore a long white robe down to his feet, and over his shoulders hung a dark red cloak, almost the color of wine, falling in folds down past his knees. His hair was long and dark brown, his beard full and neatly kept, and he was barefoot, completely barefoot, standing on the cold desert ground. Who dresses like that out here in the middle of nowhere at this hour? I thought, easing off the gas without even fully deciding to. Something about how still he was disarmed me. He wasn't running toward the truck, wasn't waving his arms like anybody stranded on a highway would. He was just standing there, upright, arm extended, with a calm that felt completely out of place against that hostile landscape. Even from a distance, his eyes seemed fixed on the truck, like he already knew I was going to stop. I braked all the way, maybe 50 feet from him, sat there with the engine idling, hesitating, checking my side mirror, scanning the brush for anyone else hiding nearby, any other shadow that looked wrong. Nothing. Just the man, alone in the desert, no broken down car, no backpack, nothing that explained why he was out there at all. This doesn't make any sense, I muttered to myself. No ranches around here, no town for another 10 miles at least. Where did he even come from? My rational side told me to keep driving, hit the gas, get away from that strange scene before it was too late. But something stronger than reason, something I couldn't have named in that moment, pushed me to roll the window down. I cracked the glass a few inches, just enough for my voice to carry. "You need help?" I asked, my voice rough from hours of silence. The man walked toward the truck with slow, almost solemn steps. He didn't run, didn't rush the way somebody desperate to escape the cold or the danger of an empty road would. He came at his own pace, like he had all the time in the world, like the whole night belonged to him. "I'm headed south," the man said, his voice deep but gentle, seeming to fill the whole cab even before he'd climbed inside. "Any chance you could take me part of the way?" I hesitated a few more seconds, looking at his eyes through the half-open window. Dark, deep, but they didn't carry any threat in them. If anything, there was something like peace in them, something I couldn't remember ever seeing in a stranger's eyes in over 30 years on the road. "Get in," I said finally, surprising myself with how fast I'd given in. The man walked around the front of the truck and climbed up into the passenger side with a fluid, almost graceful movement, even barefoot on the rough asphalt. The second he got in the cab, a strange scent filled the air, something like incense mixed with a sweetness I couldn't quite place. It wasn't unpleasant. If anything, it was comforting, like the smell of an old church in some small town you'd never been to before. "Thanks for stopping," the man said, settling into the seat. "Not many people do this time of night." "Well, it's not exactly normal to see somebody walking alone out here at this hour," I answered, putting the truck back in gear. "Especially dressed like that. You coming from a play or something?" The man smiled slightly, not quite a laugh, but something carrying a real warmth to it. "You could say that," he answered, in a tone that hinted at more than the words themselves. "I've come a long way." I nodded without thinking too much of it, my focus back on the empty road ahead. The truck picked up speed again, the high beams cutting through the darkness stretching out endlessly in front of us. "Where exactly are you headed?" I asked, glancing over at my passenger. "Wherever you're going," he answered. "I've got time." The answer struck me as strange, but I didn't push it. After all my years on the road, I'd learned not to press too hard with the occasional riders I picked up. People running from something, people looking for something, people just plain lost in life. Everybody had their own story, and it wasn't my business to dig into it as long as they weren't a danger to me. Still, there was something different about this man. It wasn't just the clothes, or the bare feet, or the strange way he'd appeared out in the middle of nowhere. It was something deeper, something in the way he looked at me, like he could see straight past the surface, like he already knew things about me I'd never told a single living soul. "Name's Karim," I said, reaching over to shake his hand quick before grabbing the wheel again. "Karim Osman." "I know," the man answered, with a calm that raised the hair on the back of my neck. "What do you mean you know?" I asked, turning my head for a second, caught off guard. "We've never met before." The man looked straight at me with those dark eyes that seemed to hold centuries of understanding, and smiled again, this time with something more mysterious in it. "There's a lot I know about you, Karim," he said, his voice soft but firm. "Things you don't even let yourself remember." A heavy silence dropped over the cab. I felt a chill run down my spine despite the heat coming off the engine and the heater running. I gripped the wheel tighter, not knowing how to respond, not understanding how this stranger could speak with such certainty about my own life. I glanced sideways at him, and he was calmly watching the road through the windshield, like nothing extraordinary had just been said at all. His profile, lit faintly by the dashboard lights, had something serene about it, almost luminous, standing out sharply against the total darkness surrounding us outside. I swallowed hard and decided for the moment not to push for more answers. But a strange feeling, some mix of fear and fascination, started settling into my chest. Something told me that night, that trip, that unexpected passenger, was going to change the course of my whole life. What I didn't know yet was just how right that feeling was. The truck kept rolling in silence down the empty highway. I kept my eyes on the asphalt, but my mind kept circling back to what the stranger had said. Things you don't even let yourself remember. What did that mean? How could a man I'd picked up in the middle of the desert at midnight talk about my life with that kind of certainty? "Hey," I said, breaking the silence after a few minutes. "What did you mean by that? Knowing things about me? I've never seen you before in my life." The man turned his head toward me with that same easy calm that never seemed to waver. "Sometimes we know people without ever having laid eyes on them before," he answered. "You've been carrying something heavy for a long time, Karim. It shows in your shoulders, in the way you grip that wheel, in how you avoid looking at the empty bunk behind you." I felt the air catch in my throat. Instinctively, I glanced in the rear view toward the back of the cab, where there was a small sleeper berth I used to share with someone else, years back. It sat empty now, covered with a folded blanket nobody had touched in a long time. "That's none of your business," I said, my voice sharper than I meant it to be. "You don't know me." "You're right," the man answered, not losing his calm at all. "I don't know you the way you're thinking. But I know pain when I see it, and you're carrying yours around like a man dragging a sack of rocks. He never lets himself set down." I clenched my jaw. My hands, worn rough from years on the wheel, tightened on the cracked plastic. I didn't want to talk about it. Not with a stranger, not in the middle of the night, not after years spent trying to bury the memory under mile after mile of highway. "What's your name?" I asked, changing the subject sharply, trying to steer the conversation someplace safer. The man smiled like he knew exactly what I was doing and decided to let me get away with it, at least for now. "You can call me whatever you'd like," he answered. "Names matter less than people think sometimes." "That's a strange answer," I muttered, shaking my head. "Everybody's got a name. Everybody's got a name and everybody's got a story," he replied. "Mine tonight is simply that of a traveler who needed someone to stop." I didn't know how to respond to that. I kept driving, eyes fixed on the yellow line disappearing into the distance, barely lit by the headlights. The silence settled back over us, but it felt different this time, heavier, carrying something I couldn't quite put my finger on. Several minutes passed like that, nobody talking, until the man broke the silence again, this time with a question that caught me completely off guard. "Do you still think about Amir?" I felt the whole world stop for a second. My son's name, spoken by a stranger in the middle of nowhere, hit me like a physical blow. I hit the brakes on instinct, slowing the truck down hard, and turned to look at the man with my eyes wide open. "How do you know that name?" I asked, my voice shaking between disbelief and anger. "I never told you anything about my son. I never even mentioned I had one." The man looked at me with an expression carrying a firmness that didn't waver, never once breaking eye contact. "I don't need you to tell me, Karim. I've seen it in you since the moment I got in this truck. I see it in how you avoid looking at that empty bunk. I see it in the photographs you keep in the glove box that you never once look at while you're driving. I see it in the letters you haven't finished writing." My hands started shaking on the wheel. That was impossible. Nobody knew about the letters. Nobody, not even my wife, knew that for 3 years I'd kept a notebook in the glove box where I kept trying, over and over, to write a letter to my dead son without ever managing to finish it. "This can't be real," I muttered, almost to myself, shaking my head like I wanted to wake up from some strange dream. "You can't know that. It's impossible." "A lot of things seem impossible until they happen right in front of your own eyes," Jesus answered, calm but firm, like someone who'd said that exact sentence many times across eternity. I pulled the truck all the way over onto the shoulder, my heart pounding against my chest. I cut the engine and sat there staring at the man beside me, trying to find some sign in his face, some clue that this was an elaborate joke, a strange coincidence, any rational explanation that would let me get my grip on the situation back. But I found none of that. All I found was a deep, serene gaze that seemed to hold all the understanding in the world. "Who are you, really?" I asked, my voice breaking. "Tell me the truth. It's not time yet for you to know all of it," the man answered without looking away. "But I promise you, Karim, before this trip is over, you're going to understand who I am and why I'm here with you tonight." I sat in silence, turning those words over. Part of me wanted to demand answers right then and there, force this man to explain himself completely. But another part, deeper, older, told me to trust, to wait, that the moment would come when it needed to. "All right," I finally said, my voice steadier, though my heart was still pounding. "But I need to understand something. Do you know what happened to Amir? Do you know how he died?" The man nodded slowly, an expression of deep sorrow crossing his face that seemed to age him for a second, like he was carrying the weight of every human loss since the beginning of time. "I know, Karim. I know it was an accident you believe you could have prevented. I know that ever since, you've been carrying guilt that isn't fully yours to carry. And I know that guilt has pushed away the people who love you most, including your wife, who sleeps alone every night while you drive highways, trying to outrun your own memories. Every word landed on me like a heavy stone, but strangely I didn't feel judged by any of it. Instead, I felt something like relief. Like for the first time in years, someone actually understood exactly what I'd been carrying in silence, without needing explanations, without needing excuses. "I should have been there," I said, my voice breaking, the first tears rising in my tired eyes. "I should have been with him that night instead of out on the highway, earning money for a family I ended up destroying through my own absence." Jesus reached out and rested his hand gently on my shoulder, a warm gesture that seemed to carry something beyond simple physical comfort. I felt a strange warmth spread through my body, like that hand had the power to ease, even a little, the weight I'd been carrying for 3 long years. "The pain you're feeling is real, Karim. And I'm not going to tell you not to feel it," the man said, his voice sounding even deeper now, almost resonant in the quiet of the desert. "But the guilt you're carrying doesn't fully belong to you. There are things no man can control, no matter how badly he wishes he could." I stayed quiet, feeling tears run freely for the first time in a long while, not trying to hold them back in front of this stranger who somehow, impossibly, seemed to know every dark corner of my heart. Outside, the desert stayed completely still, like the whole world had decided to pause and witness that moment. The stars burned with unusual intensity, and a soft breeze started moving through the dry brush like a barely audible whisper. "Let's keep going," the man finally said, pulling his hand back from my shoulder. "There's still a long way to go, and you've still got a lot to discover tonight." I nodded, wiped my tears with the back of my hand, and started the engine again. As I pulled back onto the road, I couldn't stop thinking about the stranger's words, about the absolute certainty he'd spoken about Amir, about my guilt, about my broken marriage. Nobody, absolutely nobody, knew those details with that kind of precision. And yet there he was, sitting beside me, carrying the serenity of someone who had seen the whole world and all its pain, ready to ride out the rest of the road with me. If you're still with me, don't go anywhere yet, because what happened next is the part I still can't tell without my hands shaking a little, and there's something waiting in the pinned comment under this video I don't want you to miss before we're done. The truck rolled forward again, down the lonely highway, engine humming softly into the night. I still felt the weight of the conversation before, tears drying on my weathered face. But there was something in my chest that felt different now. Lighter, like a small piece of the load I'd carried for 3 years had started dissolving. "Feeling any better?" Jesus asked, watching me carefully. "I don't know exactly what I'm feeling," I answered honestly. "But yeah, something changed. I couldn't tell you how to explain it." Jesus nodded, like that answer was exactly what he'd expected. He fell quiet for a while, looking ahead into the darkness of the road stretching endlessly in front of us. That's when I noticed a pair of headlights approaching from the opposite direction, off in the distance. Another vehicle, probably another rig hauling freight down the same stretch of desert highway. I didn't think much of it at first. It was normal to cross paths with other truckers on the overnight runs, but as the lights got closer, I noticed something wrong with the way it was moving. Instead of holding steady in its lane, it was swerving side to side, like the driver was fighting to keep control of the vehicle. "Something's wrong with that truck," I muttered, squinting to get a better look at it in the distance. The other vehicle, a huge rig loaded with what looked like heavy equipment, started swerving more and more sharply. I instinctively slowed down, my pulse spiking, watching with growing horror as the oncoming truck drifted fully into my lane, directly into a collision course. "It's going to hit us," I shouted, my heart racing, wrenching the wheel hard to the right in a desperate attempt to dodge the impact. Everything seemed to happen in slow motion. The blinding lights of the other truck lit up the whole inside of the cab. I could hear the deafening roar of the other engine, the screech of tires sliding across asphalt, the choked scream that tore out of my own throat as I understood the collision was unavoidable. that in a matter of seconds, both vehicles, loaded with tons of metal and cargo, would crash head-on at a speed that would leave no survivors. But then, right at the instant impact seemed inevitable. Something happened that I could never explain in words. Something that defied every law of physics I knew. Time seemed to stop completely. Not figuratively, literally. I felt the whole world freeze around me. The roar of the other engine cut off abruptly. The blinding lights of the other truck hung suspended in the air like a still photograph. Even the wheel under my hands stopped responding to my movement, like it was trapped inside a frozen painting. Paralyzed by terror and confusion, I turned my head toward my passenger, looking for some explanation, some reaction that would tell me what was happening, and what I saw left me completely breathless. Jesus sat perfectly calm, eyes closed, both hands extended in front of him, like he was holding something invisible between them. A faint light, barely perceptible, seemed to glow from his palms, softly lighting the inside of the cab with a golden shine, unlike anything I'd ever witnessed before. What's happening?" I whispered, my voice shaking, unable to move, unable to even fully process what my eyes were witnessing. Jesus didn't answer right away. He kept his eyes closed a few seconds longer, with an expression of deep concentration on his face, like he was holding the weight of the entire world between his outstretched hands. And then, as suddenly as it had started, everything returned to normal. The roar of the other engine came back all at once. The lights of the other truck, which seconds before had been directly in front of us on a collision course, were now perfectly aligned back in their own lane, already pulling away into the distance, like there had never been any danger of a crash at all. With my hands shaking uncontrollably on the wheel, I slammed on the brakes, pulling the truck completely off onto the shoulder. My breathing was ragged, broken, and my heart was pounding so hard I could hear it echo in my own ears. "What was that?" I asked, my voice cracking, turning my whole body to face the man beside me. That truck was headed straight at us. I saw it. We were seconds from dying. "How did it just stop?" I said, unable to find the right words to describe what I'd just witnessed. The man, with a calm that felt almost unsettling after what had happened, turned his face toward me and looked at me with those dark, deep eyes that seemed to hold all the wisdom of the universe. "Sometimes, Karim, danger shows up in front of us not to destroy us, but to remind us how fragile and precious life really is," Jesus said, his voice soft but heavy with meaning. "Tonight was not the moment for you to leave this world." "But what you did," I insisted, pointing a trembling finger at the man's hands. "I saw a light. I saw time stop. That's not something a normal man can do." Jesus didn't deny it, didn't confirm anything right away either. He just held my gaze with a serene, almost compassionate expression, like someone watching a child try to understand something too big for their current understanding. "There are forces in this world, Karim, that go beyond what human eyes can easily explain," he finally answered. "You've spent your whole life trusting only what you can touch, what you can measure with your own two hands. But tonight, maybe it's time you started considering that there are bigger realities than the ones you've known until now." I sat in silence, processing those words, while my breathing slowly returned to something closer to normal. I checked the rear view, looked back down the empty road behind us, searching for some sign of the other truck, some physical evidence of what had just happened. But there was nothing. Just the empty highway, silent, like the whole incident had never taken place at all. "You saved my life," I finally said, my voice low, almost a whisper. "You saved both of us." "Let's just say I helped fate find its proper course," the man answered, with the faintest smile on his lips. I sat there in silence for several minutes, hands still resting on the wheel, not quite ready to put the truck back in gear. My mind kept spinning, trying to find some rational explanation for what I'd just witnessed, but every attempt failed against the undeniable evidence of my own senses. "Who are you, really?" I finally asked, a mix of fear and wonder in my voice, because no normal man can do what I just saw. The man looked at me steadily, an expression weighing exactly how much he could reveal in that moment, how much I was ready to hear and understand. "All in good time, Karim," he finally answered. "I promised you that before this trip ends, you'll understand who I am, and that promise still stands. But for now, let's keep moving. There's still a lot you need to witness tonight." I nodded slowly, though my mind was still crowded with unanswered questions. With hands still shaking, I started the engine again and pulled back onto the empty road, now with a completely different feeling running through my body. The absolute certainty that this trip, this night, was nothing close to ordinary. As we kept driving, I couldn't stop stealing glances at my strange passenger, searching his calm face for some additional clue, some hint that would help me understand the true nature of the man who decided to climb into my truck that night. But he stayed quiet, looking out toward the dark horizon, like he was waiting with infinite patience for the moment when everything would finally be revealed. What I didn't know yet was that just a few miles ahead, we'd arrive at a tiny town almost forgotten by time, where I'd witness a second wonder that would finish convincing me that reality, as I'd always known it, would never be the same again. After almost another hour of driving in a silence loaded with unanswered questions, I spotted a small cluster of flickering lights in the distance. It turned out to be a tiny settlement, the kind that barely shows up on road maps, made up of a handful of adobe houses, a gas station with more years on it than good maintenance, and a small church with a facade peeling from years of desert sun. "I need to fuel up," I said, pointing at the gauge dropping dangerously close to empty. "That town's got to have a station open this time of night." The man nodded without a word, his eyes fixed on the distant lights of the settlement, like he already knew exactly what was about to happen there. Pulling in, I steered the truck toward the only gas station in sight, a small, lonely spot, lit by a flickering sign barely managing to stay on. An older man, his face weathered by years of desert sun, came out of the little office to help us, surprised to have customers at that hour of the morning. While I was fueling up, I noticed movement near the town's little church. A small group of people, maybe a dozen, gathered near the entrance, visible distress on their faces, even from a distance. Among them, a woman held what looked like a small child in her arms, completely still. "Something's going on over there," I said, nodding toward the church. "Looks serious." Jesus, who'd stayed quiet inside the cab up to that point, opened the door and climbed down with real determination, walking straight toward the group gathered outside the church. Caught off guard by my passenger's sudden initiative, I finished fueling up as fast as I could and followed after him, worried and curious in equal measure. Getting closer, I could hear the woman's desperate sobbing as she held the child. An older man, likely the town's pastor judging by his clothes, was trying to comfort her without much success, while everyone else nearby murmured prayers under their breath, hands clasped, heads bowed. My son isn't breathing right," the woman sobbed, rocking the small body desperately in her arms. "He's been like this for hours. The nearest doctor's 2 hours away, and I don't know if he'll make the trip." The child, who couldn't have been older than 5, was breathing weak and shallow, lips turning slightly blue, his little body limp in his mother's arms. I'd seen enough emergencies in my years on the road to recognize immediately how serious it was. "We need to get him to a hospital right now," I said, stepping toward the group. "I can drive you in my truck. It's faster than—" But I stopped mid-sentence, noticing my passenger had already knelt down in front of the woman, his face carrying an expression of deep serenity, completely detached from the desperation gripping everyone else there. "Let me see the child," the man said, his voice soft but somehow naturally taking command of the chaos of the moment. The woman, startled by the presence of this stranger in a white robe and red cloak, hesitated for a second, but something in the man's calm gaze seemed to give her an inexplicable trust. With shaking hands, she handed him the child. Jesus held the boy with extreme care, placing one hand gently over his small chest, right over the heart. He closed his eyes and stayed like that, in complete silence, for what felt like an eternity. though it couldn't have been more than 30 seconds. I stood there with everyone else watching, holding my breath, not daring to interrupt that moment of absolute tension. The town's pastor, who'd been murmuring prayers since the beginning, went completely still, eyes fixed on the scene in front of him, like he recognized something in that gesture that went beyond ordinary understanding. Suddenly, the child started coughing softly. His small lungs seemed to fill with air more strongly, and color gradually returned to his lips, shifting from that alarming blue to a healthy pink. He opened his eyes slowly, confused but conscious, and started crying with the normal strength of a frightened little boy, a cry that to everyone present sounded like the most beautiful music they'd ever heard. "He's breathing. My son's breathing right again," the woman shouted through tears of absolute relief, pulling the child back into her arms and holding him with desperate strength. A murmur of astonishment ran through the small crowd gathered outside the church. Several people dropped to their knees on the spot, others crossed themselves over and over, and the pastor, tears running down his weathered face, approached the man in the white robe slowly, watching him with a mix of reverence and something close to fear. "Who are you?" the pastor asked, his voice trembling, unable to look away from the stranger's serene face. "I've seen a lot of things in my years serving this community, but never anything like this." Jesus stood up slowly, with that same calm he'd carried through the whole thing, and looked at the pastor with an expression combining humility with an inexplicable depth. "I'm just a traveler, Father," he answered, his voice soft. A traveler who stopped for a moment to help someone who needed it. But the pastor didn't seem convinced by that modest answer. He kept watching the man with growing intensity until suddenly his eyes went wide, like an impossible realization had just struck him. "It can't be," the pastor murmured, stepping back, his voice barely audible. "I've preached my whole life about this moment, about the possibility of an encounter like this. But I never actually thought." He couldn't finish the sentence. He simply dropped to his knees in front of the man, hands clasped in prayer, murmuring words I could barely make out. But that sounded suspiciously like the name of Jesus Christ. Watching the whole scene with my heart racing and my mind completely overwhelmed by what I'd just witnessed, I felt pieces of an impossible puzzle slowly starting to click together in my head. I remembered stories my grandmother used to tell me as a kid, sitting by the fire on cold nights in our old family home. Stories about someone appearing to people in need, about miracles, about a man who walked among the poor doing good without ever asking for anything in return. "This can't be true," I whispered to myself, feeling my legs go a little weak. "It's impossible. This kind of thing doesn't happen in real life." But watching the man in white gently help the woman to her feet, watching the pastor kneeling in profound reverence, feeling that sweet, unmistakable scent I'd noticed since the moment this stranger first climbed into my truck, I started to understand, with a mix of terror and wonder, that maybe my grandmother's stories hadn't just been bedtime tales after all. Maybe, after everything, I'd picked up someone truly extraordinary in my truck that night. Jesus walked back over to me with that same serene smile, like the miracle he'd just performed was simply a natural part of his existence, as ordinary as breathing. "Time to keep moving, Karim," he said, his voice soft. "There's still a lot of road left before sunrise." With my legs still shaking and my mind completely overwhelmed by the implications of what I'd just witnessed, I nodded slowly and started walking back toward the truck, following that mysterious passenger whose true identity was slowly starting to reveal itself right in front of my own eyes. Behind us, the small group of townspeople stayed gathered, watching in astonishment as the two of us walked back toward the dark highway, while the pastor, still on his knees, kept murmuring prayers of gratitude up at the starry sky. The truck pulled back onto the main highway, leaving behind the lights of the small town, and the group of townspeople still gathered outside the church, moved by what they'd just witnessed. I drove in silence, hands steady on the wheel, but my mind was a storm of thoughts that refused to settle into any kind of order. I'd seen what I'd seen. A child on the edge of death, breathing normally seconds after that man laid his hand on his chest. A pastor with a whole lifetime of faith dropping to his knees, murmuring a name I still wasn't quite ready to say out loud myself. And before that, the truck barreling toward us on a collision course, the danger vanishing in an instant that defied every law of physics I understood. "I can't keep pretending this is normal," I finally said, breaking the silence that had settled between us for the last few minutes. "What I saw back there, what happened with that other truck. You're not an ordinary man. No human being can do what you did." The man watched me calmly, no surprise at all at my statement, like he'd been patiently waiting for the moment I'd finally say it out loud. "And what do you think I am, Karim?" he asked, his voice soft, almost giving me permission to explore the idea that had been circling my head for hours. I swallowed hard, feeling the words catch in my throat. I glanced sideways at my passenger again, taking in the spotless white robe, the dark red cloak, the absolute serenity radiating from every one of his gestures, even after witnessing and doing things no man should be capable of. "My grandmother used to tell me stories," I started, my voice shaking. "Stories about a man who walked among the poor, who healed the sick, who forgave people nobody else would forgive. Stories about—" I stopped, unable to finish the sentence, like saying that name out loud would make the whole thing unbearably real. "Go on," the man said with infinite calm, gently encouraging me to finish the thought. "About Jesus Christ," I finished, almost in a whisper, feeling a chill run through my entire body saying that name. "Is that you? Is it possible that you're—" The man didn't answer right away. He just smiled, an expression carrying both infinite tenderness and a depth I couldn't fully grasp, and stayed quiet for a moment, like he was deciding exactly how much he could reveal at that exact point in the trip. "Answers come when the heart is ready to receive them, Karim," he finally said, "and yours is only just starting to open tonight. But before we talk about who I am, let's talk about who you are. Because tonight isn't only about revelations concerning my identity, it's also about you finally facing what you've been avoiding for 3 long years." I felt my stomach tighten. I knew exactly what he meant, though part of me, the more cowardly part, the more wounded part, still wanted to avoid that conversation at all costs. "I don't know if I'm ready to talk about that," I admitted, my voice breaking, eyes fixed on the dark road stretching endlessly ahead of us. "I know," the man answered with infinite patience. "But I also know that carrying that weight alone in silence for this long is slowly eating you up from the inside, and you can't fully heal until you finally let yourself say the truth out loud." I stayed quiet for several minutes, wrestling internally with the decision to open that wound I'd kept closed, covered, hidden away for so long. But there was something about this man's presence, something about the absolute certainty that I wouldn't be judged, that finally gave me the courage to speak. "It was 3 years ago," I started, my voice trembling more with every word. "Amir, my son, was 19. He was studying engineering out at Arizona State, full scholarship, the pride of the whole family. I spent most of the year out on the road driving this same truck, trying to give my family a better life than the one I'd had growing up." I paused, breathing deep, gathering the strength to keep going with the story. "That night, Amir called me. He needed to talk to me about something important." He sounded upset on the phone, almost desperate. He told me he'd made a serious mistake, that he was mixed up in something dangerous with some people who scared him, that he needed my advice, my help. But I was in the middle of an urgent delivery, more than 6 hours out, and I told him we'd talk it through calmly once I got home. Told him not to call me with that kind of thing while I was working. Tears started running freely down my weathered face as I kept telling the story I'd carried for 3 years without ever daring to share it with anyone. "That was the last time I ever talked to my son," I continued, my voice completely broken. "That same night,
Amir decided to face whatever situation he was in alone. We never found out exactly all the details, but the police found his body the next day in an alley near his apartment. They said it was a robbery that went wrong.
I know, deep in my soul, that if I'd stopped the truck that night, if I'd driven straight home, if I'd just listened to him instead of telling him to wait, my son would still be alive today. The man listened in complete silence, an expression of deep compassion on his face, never once interrupting my painful account. Ever since, I continued, wiping my tears with the back of my hand, I can't forgive myself, not once. Every time I'm out on this highway, every time I get a call while I'm driving, I hear his voice asking for help, and I tell him to wait again. My wife Yasmin's tried to help me get through this, but I've pushed her away. I've pushed everyone away. Because I feel like I don't deserve anyone's comfort. I deserve to carry this alone forever. The man stayed quiet a few moments longer, letting the weight of that confession fully settle into the air between us, before he finally spoke, his voice soft but firm. Karim, listen to me carefully, he said. You couldn't have known that night that ending that call would lead to consequences that tragic. You acted the way any working father would act, trusting there'd be time later to listen, to help, to be present. The guilt you're carrying doesn't come from any real wrongdoing on your part. It comes from the deep love you felt and still feel for your son. But if only I'd the ifs, I started. Ifs are the cruelest prison a human being ever builds for themselves, the man interrupted, with a firmness that left no room for argument. You didn't choose for your son to face that danger alone. You didn't choose the actions of the people who hurt him. You only made the deeply human mistake of believing there'd be more time. And that mistake, Karim, doesn't deserve to cost you the rest of your own life in eternal penance. I felt something inside my chest start to crack open. Not from pain this time, but from a deep, unfamiliar relief. Like for the first time in 3 years, someone was genuinely giving me permission to stop punishing myself. Amir wouldn't want to see you destroyed by guilt, pushed away from everyone who loves you, carrying this weight alone for the rest of your days, the man continued, his voice growing warmer with every word. Your son loved you deeply, Karim, and wherever he is now, all he wants is for you to find peace, to go back to your wife's arms, to live fully again, honoring his memory with love instead of endless suffering. Unable to hold back the tears now running freely down my face, I felt something deep inside me shift, something that had been completely frozen for 3 years, slowly starting to thaw. How do you know all this? I asked, my voice barely audible. How can you be so sure what Amir would feel or want? Jesus looked at me steadily, an expression finally starting to reveal a depth almost impossible to contain inside an ordinary human form. Because, Karim, there are truths that go beyond time and space. Truths only known from somewhere beyond what human eyes can perceive, he answered, his voice seeming to carry a serene, absolute authority. And tonight is the moment for you to start trusting those truths, even if you don't yet fully understand where they come from. With my heart broken, but strangely lighter than it had felt in years, I kept driving in silence, letting the words of that mysterious man settle deep into my soul, while the first light of dawn started creeping timidly over the distant horizon. If this story stirred something in you tonight, don't leave yet. Check the first pinned comment under this video. That's where we left something for you. The sky slowly started turning shades of orange and pink along the horizon, announcing the approach of sunrise. My eyes were still red from the tears I'd shed during the most painful confession of my life, but I felt a strange mix of exhaustion and lightness moving through my whole body, like I'd carried an enormous stone on my shoulders for 3 years, and someone had finally helped me set it down on the ground. Not much longer till it's fully light out, I said, glancing toward the horizon where the first golden light was starting to outline the distant mountains. We've still got a couple hours to El Paso. The man, sitting quietly beside me, watched the sunrise too, with a serene, almost contemplative expression. Like every sunrise he witnessed, carried a special meaning that went beyond a simple sunrise. "Karim," he finally said, in a tone that made my heart race instinctively, sensing something important was about to happen. "We're coming up on a crossroads a little further ahead. That's where I need to get out." I felt an unexpected pang of sadness at those words. After everything we'd lived through in the last few hours, after the revelations, the miracles I'd witnessed, the deepest confession of my entire life, the idea of parting ways with this mysterious man felt surprisingly painful. "You're leaving already?" I asked, disappointment plain in my voice. I don't know. I guess I thought maybe you'd ride with me all the way to El Paso, or at least tell me clearly who you are before you go." The man smiled warmly, a smile that seemed to light up the inside of the cab even more, even with the growing light of sunrise already streaming through the windshield. "Karim, I think deep in your heart you already know who I am," he answered, his voice soft but carrying deep meaning. "The signs have been there this whole trip. The accident avoided, defying every explanation. The child healed right in front of your own eyes. Knowledge of secrets no mortal man could possibly have about your life. And now, the peace that's starting to settle into your heart, after years of carrying guilt that was never fully yours." I felt a lump form in my throat. I knew deep down exactly what the man meant, but I still struggled to say those words out loud, like saying them directly would make the full reality of what I was living through overwhelmingly true. "Are you really?" I started, my voice shaking, unable to finish the question. Jesus looked at me with an expression of infinite tenderness and a serene authority that seemed to transcend any ordinary human form. "I am who I have always been, Karim," he answered, his voice seeming to resonate with a depth almost impossible to hold. "And tonight I decided to walk alongside you because more than anything else, you needed to feel that you weren't alone with your pain." Those words, though they didn't explicitly confirm what I already suspected with absolute certainty, were enough to bring the tears back to my eyes. This time tears of an emotion I didn't fully know how to name: gratitude, wonder, reverent fear, and a deep peace I'd never once experienced before in my life. "Thank you," I whispered, my voice completely broken. "Thank you for stopping. Thank you for letting me stop for you, for everything you did tonight, for helping me let go, even a little, of this weight I've been carrying. Before we reach the crossroads where I have to get out, Karim, I need to ask you for something," the man said, his expression turning more serious, more purposeful. "Something important you'll need to follow through on after I'm gone." I nodded immediately, completely ready to do whatever this extraordinary being asked of me after everything we'd lived through together that night. "Anything," I answered with total sincerity. "Just tell me what you need me to do." "When you get home after this trip, I want you to talk to Yasmin," the man said, using my wife's name with a familiarity that no longer surprised me after everything I'd witnessed. "Tell her exactly what you told me tonight, about Amir, about the guilt you've been carrying in silence. She's been suffering too, Karim, feeling alone in her own grief while you pulled away, thinking she didn't deserve to be comforted either. You both need to heal together, not apart." I felt the tears rising again, this time thinking about Yasmin, about the lonely nights she'd spent at home while I drove highways trying to outrun my own ghosts, never realizing I was abandoning her too in the process. "I'll do it," I promised with absolute determination. "I promise you." "Is there anything else?" I continued. "Not far from here, in a town called Cottonwood Flats, there's a family who recently lost their son under circumstances similar to Amir's," the man said. "The father's name is Malik. He's carrying guilt just like yours, and he started pulling away from everyone who loves him, exactly the way you did these last 3 years. I want you to find him, Karim. I want you to share with him what you learned tonight." Surprised by how specific the request was, I nodded slowly, understanding that this whole night's encounter This extraordinary trip carried a purpose reaching far beyond just my own personal healing. "How do I find that family?" I asked, genuinely ready to carry out that mission. "Ask at the little hardware store in town for Malik Rahman," the man answered with perfect precision. "He works there. And when you find him, just tell him your story with the same honesty you told it to me tonight." Sometimes, Kareem, the best way to fully heal our own wounds is by helping someone else heal theirs. The truck kept moving as the sun climbed fully over the horizon, bathing the whole desert in warm golden light that contrasted sharply with the darkness of the night we were leaving behind. In the distance, I could make out the crossroads the man had mentioned, a small intersection where a dirt road split off from the main highway, heading toward distant mountains. "That's it," Jesus said, pointing toward the crossroads. "That's where I get out." I slowed down gradually, feeling every foot closer to that spot hurt a little more, like I was about to say goodbye to someone deeply important, someone whose presence in my life, however brief, had changed everything irreversibly. I brought the truck to a full stop right at the crossroads, and we both sat in silence a moment, like neither of us wanted to rush the inevitable moment of parting. "Will I see you again?" I finally asked, my voice hopeful, almost childlike in its sincerity. Jesus smiled with infinite warmth, a smile that seemed to hold all the tenderness in the universe. "Whenever you need to remember you're not alone, Kareem, I'll be there," he answered, his voice soft but carrying an eternal promise. Not always this visible, this direct, but there. "Now go and do what I've asked, and always remember that love, not guilt, is what truly honors the memory of the people who are no longer physically with us." With those words, the man opened the truck door and climbed down with that same serene grace he'd carried getting in hours before. With my heart racing, I watched my extraordinary passenger walking slowly toward the crossroads, gradually disappearing into the golden light of sunrise. I blinked, maybe trying to clear the tears still blurring my vision, and when I opened my eyes again, completely stunned, the man was gone. Completely gone. There was no figure walking down the dirt road, no visible footprints in the soft ground at the crossroads, no trace at all that this extraordinary being had been there seconds before, walking slowly under the rising sun. I got out of the truck fast, heart hammering, and ran toward the exact spot where I'd seen the man disappear. I looked in every direction, scanning the desert landscape stretched out around me, but found no sign, no clue, no physical evidence that this man had ever really existed beyond the vivid, unforgettable memory now etched into my soul. I stood there in the middle of the crossroads for several minutes, the first warm light of sunrise bathing my tear-streaked face, finally understanding, with an absolute certainty that went beyond any rational doubt, exactly who my mysterious passenger had been that night I'd never forget as long as I lived. I stood there at the crossroads for a long while, unable to move, unable to fully process the magnitude of what I'd just witnessed. The sun had fully risen over the horizon by then, bathing the whole desert in warm golden light, a sharp contrast to the cold darkness of the night that had wrapped around me just hours before. Finally, legs still shaking, I walked slowly back to my truck. Before climbing in, I paused for a moment beside the passenger seat, looking at the exact spot where my extraordinary rider had sat the whole trip. There, on the worn fabric of the seat, I noticed something I hadn't seen before, a small mark, almost invisible, carrying that same sweet fragrance, something like incense that I'd noticed from the very first moment the man got into the truck. I sat down slowly behind the wheel, still processing every detail of that impossible night, when my eyes landed on the glove box. With shaking hands I opened it, and there I found the notebook, where for 3 years I'd tried, without success, to write a letter to Amir. I picked it up carefully, and opening it, found something that left me completely breathless. The letter I myself had left unfinished the last time I'd touched it, months earlier, now appeared complete. The handwriting was unmistakably my own, but I had no memory of writing those final lines. The last words read, "Son, the love I feel for you doesn't depend on me carrying guilt that was never mine to carry. I honor you by living, not by suffering. Rest in peace, my Amir. Dad loves you always. I closed the notebook with trembling hands, feeling the tears run freely down my face again. But this time, they were tears of deep relief, of a healing only just beginning to settle into my broken heart. I put the truck back in gear and kept driving toward El Paso, my mind completely full of everything I'd lived through that extraordinary night. When I finally reached my destination and finished unloading the freight, I decided, without hesitating for a second, to take a detour from my usual route home to carry out the first of the requests my mysterious passenger had made. Finding Malik Rahman in the town of Cottonwood Flats. The town turned out to be even smaller than I'd imagined, just a handful of dusty streets surrounded by humble houses. I found the hardware store without much trouble, a small storefront with a sun-bleached sign, and walking in I found a middle-aged man behind the counter, his face marked by deep, obvious grief, working the register alone. "Excuse me," I said, stepping in carefully. "You Malik Rahman?" The man looked up, surprised that a stranger knew his full name, and nodded slowly, an expression of curiosity mixed with exhaustion on his face. "Yeah, that's me. What can I do for you?" Not quite sure how to start, I decided to just be honest, the way the man on the highway had asked me to be. "My name's Kareem Osman. I'm a trucker. Last night I had a really strange, really special encounter with someone who specifically asked me to come find you." I started, feeling the words sound strange even as I said them. "I know this might sound completely crazy, but I need to tell you my story, because I think you're going through something a lot like what I've been carrying for the last 3 years. Malik frowned, visibly confused and defensive. But there was something in the obvious sincerity in my voice that made him hesitate before just telling me to leave. "I don't understand what you're talking about," he said cautiously. "I lost my son 3 years ago," I continued, holding his gaze. "And ever since, I've carried a guilt so heavy, it pushed away my wife, my family, everyone who wanted to help me. I thought I deserved to suffer alone forever. Some kind of penance for not being there when he needed me most." Malik went completely still, his eyes starting to well up as he listened to every word I said with total attention. "How do you know?" he started to ask, his voice breaking, but I gently cut him off. "Last night I met someone extraordinary, Malik, someone who helped me understand that the guilt I'd been carrying wasn't fully mine, that my son wouldn't want to see me destroyed by suffering, but living, honoring his memory with love instead of endless pain. And that same person specifically asked me to come find you and tell you exactly the same thing." Tears started running freely down Malik's face, and finally, after a long silence heavy with emotion, he started sharing his own story. The loss of his oldest son in an accident he felt he could have prevented, the growing isolation from his wife and his other kids, the devastating guilt that had been slowly consuming him for months. The two of us, complete strangers just an hour before, ended up talking for almost 2 hours inside that little hardware store, sharing similar pain, deep understanding, and an unexpected connection that could only be explained by the intervention of something far bigger than either of us could fully comprehend. Before we said goodbye, Malik hugged me with desperate strength, thanking me deeply for having the courage to seek him out, for showing him there was a possible path toward healing he hadn't been able to see on his own. Back on the highway, I felt a deep warmth settling permanently into my chest, the certainty of having fulfilled, even partially, the purpose that extraordinary being had entrusted to me. Finally arriving home, I found Yasmin sitting at the kitchen table, staring at a cup of coffee gone cold, the same quiet loneliness I'd been avoiding confronting for 3 long years written all over her face. I walked over slowly, knelt down in front of her, and for the first time since Amir's death, started talking openly about everything I'd been carrying in silence. Yasmin cried, held me, and together we finally began the real healing process both of us had needed so desperately for so long, without ever once letting ourselves share it with each other. Weeks later, I decided to go back to the small town where I'd witnessed the child's miraculous healing. I found the pastor who'd dropped to his knees that night, and together we talked at length about what had happened. The pastor confirmed that ever since that extraordinary night, the whole small town couldn't stop talking about the miracle they'd witnessed, and that several witnesses had sworn they'd seen a light in that mysterious stranger's face that no ordinary human being could possibly carry. A lot of folks in this town firmly believe it was a divine visitation, the pastor confessed to me, his eyes still bright with emotion remembering that night. And after 30 years serving this community, after seeing what I saw with my own 2 eyes, I believe it too. I nodded slowly, my heart full of a peace I'd never once experienced in my entire adult life, knowing with absolute certainty that this night on the highway, that impossible encounter with a barefoot man asking for a ride in the middle of the desert, had been so much more than a strange coincidence. It had been, without any doubt at all, an encounter with the divine itself, an intervention that had not only saved my physical life during that near head-on collision, but had also saved my soul, trapped for 3 years in a prison of self-imposed guilt. If you're still here, this is the part I want you to actually sit with. Whatever your own canyon looks like right now, whatever weight you're carrying alone on your own highway, comment the words "Never Alone" below this video. I read every single one. Some months after that night, I did something I never imagined myself doing. I drove out to a small church on the edge of Phoenix, one Yasmin had started attending on her own during those lonely years I'd pushed her away, and I asked the pastor there if he had time to talk. I told him everything, start to finish, the same way I'd told Malik, the same way I'd told Yasmin. I told him about the family I'd been raised in, the faith I'd grown up honoring my whole life, taught to respect Isa as one of the greatest prophets God ever sent. And I told him that after everything I'd lived through on that highway, I could no longer honestly say that was the whole truth of who I'd met that night. The pastor listened to every word without once interrupting. When I finished, he asked me gently what I actually believed now, in my own heart, not what anyone else expected me to say. I sat with that question a long time, and then I told him the truth. I believe Jesus Christ is Lord, I said. Not only a prophet, not only a great teacher, but exactly who he showed me he was that night on the highway, exactly who he showed that pastor in that little desert church, exactly who saved my life twice in the same night, once on the road and once inside my own chest. I was baptized that spring, in that same small Phoenix church, with Yasmin standing in the front row crying through the whole thing. Some of my own family back home have struggled with that decision in ways I understand completely, because I once would have struggled with it too. But I have never once regretted saying those words out loud, standing in that water, admitting finally who I believe he truly is. Since then, every time I drive that same stretch of desert highway on a job, I slow down without even meaning to when I pass that crossroads, the exact spot where that extraordinary man disappeared that morning. And though I never crossed paths with him again in quite that same direct physical way, I always feel, deep in my heart, a comforting presence, a constant reminder that I was never truly alone, not for one single moment of my whole life. And every time somebody asks me why, after all these years driving lonely highways, I still stop without hesitating for anyone I see walking alone, asking for help on the side of the road. I just smile with a quiet warmth and answer with a certainty born from everything I lived through that night. Because you never really know exactly who you might be about to meet. Before you go, make sure you check the first pinned comment under this video. And if this story reached you tonight, comment the words "Never Alone" below. I read every single one, and I pray over them by name when I can. May Jesus walk with you today, and in every day that is still ahead of you. Amen.